this length of time, we're desperate to find Madeleine. That's a key thing. Kate and I strongly believe that Madeleine was alive when she was taken from the apartment. Obviously, what we don't know is what happened to her afterwards, who's taken her and what her motive is, and we're desperate to find that.
When 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, on May 3, 2007, attention quickly turned to her father, Gerry McCann, a respected cardiologist. Gerry was the last known family member to see Madeleine that evening. In the weeks that followed, his composed public demeanor, shifting statements, and occasional emotional restraint drew scrutiny. Across multiple interviews, observers noted patterns, controlled body language, tense responses to probing questions, and a tendency to steer narratives. While no direct evidence ever linked Gerry to the disappearance, his interviews often raised eyebrows, particularly when inconsistencies emerged about how he entered the apartment or reacted in the crucial moments after Madeleine vanished. Nearly 2 decades later, Gerry remains a complex figure. A father who has never stopped searching for his daughter, yet whose words, choices, and silences continue to provoke quiet, but persistent doubt. At 9:05 p.m. on the evening of May 3, 2007, Gerry McCann left the dinner table to check on his children. He would later describe the moment with clinical simplicity. He walked to the apartment, entered, stood at the bedroom doorway, watched Madeleine sleep, and returned. The entire interaction, according to him, lasted no more than a minute. But the detail that would draw lasting scrutiny wasn't what he saw, it was how he got in. In his first official statement to Portuguese police, Gerry said he entered the apartment through the locked front door, using a key. 6 days later, in a revised statement, he said he entered through the unlocked patio doors at the rear. Why the change? Why did a trained cardiologist, a man used to precision and documentation, alter such a fundamental piece of the timeline? The patio doors had only been accessible from the inside. Leaving them unlocked exposed the apartment, and that change reshaped how investigators understood the security of the scene. Gerry offered no public explanation. To some, it was an honest error under stress. To others, it was the first visible crack in his credibility. Investigators quietly flagged the discrepancy. Another detail, Gerry insisted that the distance from the restaurant to the apartment was short, 50 meters. In one interview, he even quoted a precise figure, 49.4 meters. He emphasized that the parents had a direct line of sight, but physical inspections and satellite photos later revealed that the view of apartment 5A was partly obstructed. Crucially, the bedroom window, where Madeleine slept, was not visible from the table. Again, it's a detail that seems minor, until it's not. At 10 p.m., Kate McCann returned to the apartment and raised the alarm. She reported that the bedroom window was open, the shutters lifted, the curtain blowing inward. Gerry reportedly rushed to her side, but his reaction, as described by witnesses, was surprisingly restrained. There was no shouting, no public breakdown. He moved quickly, organizing searches, giving instructions. Some called it calm under pressure. Others found it disconcerting. Why wasn't he panicked? This theme would continue in the media. In early interviews, Gerry appeared composed, articulate, and controlled. To viewers expecting raw emotion, his tone felt off. Behavioral analysts noted a pattern, distancing language, passive constructions, a reluctance to use Madeleine's name. He referred to her as the child, to the event as the situation. In high-profile criminal cases, this type of language often signals psychological detachment. It's not proof, but it's not ignored. The timeline between 9:05 and 10 became critical. During that window, another member of the dinner group, Jane Tanner, claimed to see a man carrying a child across the street around 9:15 p.m. She did not alert anyone. At the time, no one knew Madeleine was missing. The sighting became pivotal. If accurate, it could indicate the moment Madeleine was taken. But who was the man? Then came the statement from Martin Smith, an Irish tourist who was in Praia da Luz that night. He told police that around 10 p.m., he saw a man walking toward the beach carrying a young blonde child. Weeks later, after watching news footage of the McCanns returning to the UK, Smith claimed he was 80% sure the man he saw was Gerry McCann. The man's gait, the way he held the child, the build, it matched. No solid evidence ever corroborated the claim. Yet it remains one of the most debated witness statements in the case. If true, it would place Gerry away from the apartment, just as Kate was discovering Madeleine's absence. If false, it would mean little. But in a case with so few facts, it lingered. There were other irregularities. Police noted no signs of forced entry. The shutters, allegedly jimmied open, showed no damage. No footprints on the flower bed outside the window. No fingerprints on the window ledge. Yet Gerry and Kate insisted that an intruder entered through that window. Why assert a break-in when physical evidence didn't support it? Attention returned to the patio doors. Gerry had changed his story once. If they were left unlocked, as he later admitted, an abductor wouldn't have needed to force anything. But if that were the case, why emphasize the window? The McCanns and their friends, later dubbed the Tapa Seven, gave overlapping but occasionally conflicting accounts of their checks on the children. Some claimed Gerry returned at 9:10. Others said 9:15. Inconsistencies in timing. Vague descriptions. No one could recall precisely when each check occurred. Small details, yet crucial when reconstructing a 55-minute window during which a child vanished. None of this is proof of wrongdoing. But the story that unfolded in those first 60 minutes has never fully aligned. The longer the timeline is examined, the more room for questions appears. Gerry McCann has always maintained his innocence. But in true crime, innocence isn't just a matter of evidence. It's a matter of perception. And perception is shaped by tone, timing, and contradiction. Gerry's demeanor, both in those first moments and in the years that followed, remained the same: controlled, precise, measured. For some, that is the image of a man holding himself together in the face of unimaginable horror. For others, it is something else entirely. In the early days after Madeleine McCann vanished, Gerry McCann stood where no parent ever expects to be, in front of cameras, microphones, and a global audience. Alongside his wife, he became the voice of the crisis. He addressed the press with clipped determination. His words were deliberate, his posture composed. "We will not rest until we find Madeleine and bring her home," he said. The statement made headlines. But for some, it also raised eyebrows. His tone was calm, too calm, some would later argue, for a man whose daughter had just disappeared under mysterious circumstances. From the beginning, Gerry took the lead in public communication. While Kate appeared visibly shaken, often silent, Gerry answered questions, appealed to the public, and maintained a firm grip on the message. His background as a cardiologist, a profession demanding composure under pressure, was cited by supporters as a reason for his discipline. Yet for critics, that very composure felt rehearsed. Some viewers described his facial expressions as measured, his gaze too steady. Emotional restraint can be a survival mechanism, or it can be something else. The press initially portrayed the McCanns as victims, but that sympathy began to shift when forensic dogs, Eddie and Keela, were brought in from the UK. The dogs alerted to the scent of human decomposition in two key locations: behind the living room sofa in apartment 5A, and in the trunk of a rental car the McCanns began using weeks after Madeleine disappeared. Blood samples were collected. Partial DNA results were obtained. The Portuguese authorities began to reconsider their direction. So did the media. In televised interviews, Gerry dismissed the findings. He questioned the reliability of the dogs, the integrity of the forensic process, and the motivations behind the leaks. In a 2008 interview, he called the suggestions ludicrous, pointing to the timeline as a logical impossibility. "There wasn't enough time," he said. "We were checking on the children in half-hour intervals. If something happened in that window, how could we have hidden a body, left no trace, and continued dinner as if nothing happened?" The argument was precise, even persuasive, but it lacked one quality many expected from a grieving father: visible anguish. In one interview, he described the moment as a disruption of normality. Behavioral analysts later pointed to linguistic distancing, a subtle shift in speech that can indicate a psychological separation from an event or person. Not proof, but notable. The shift intensified in September 2007. Gerry and Kate were formally named arguidos by Portuguese police. Under Portuguese law, this meant they were considered suspects, though not yet charged. The change in status legally restricted what they could say in interviews. Publicly, however, the pressure mounted. Gerry's interviews became more reserved. His phrases shorter. "We can't comment on that," became a repeated line. His body language changed, too, arms folded, voice lower, eyes darting. Journalists began noticing. So did the public. Online forums exploded. Video clips were slowed down, frame by frame. Internet sleuths dissected every facial twitch, every hesitation. A fleeting smile after one press conference, whether from nervous exhaustion or something else, became a focal point. On social media, speculation turned aggressive. Hashtags called him a liar. Conspiracy channels gained momentum. And through it all, Gerry stayed on script. He continued to manage the family's public image. He spoke at events, launched the Find Madeleine campaign, and coordinated legal responses. Kate stepped back, emotionally overwhelmed. Gerry remained the face of the crisis. Some admired his resilience. Others saw it as a strategy. "He's too polished." One commentator noted, "He speaks like a politician, not a father." The media turned sharper when details emerged about the rental car. The vehicle had been hired 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Yet the forensic dogs alerted to it. Traces of bodily fluids were found. DNA tests yielded partial matches to Madeleine, but they were inconclusive. British experts warned that the results were not definitive. Portuguese officials disagreed. Public opinion fractured further. In interviews, Gerry repeated the same point. The evidence didn't hold up. He emphasized contamination possibilities. He criticized the media for spreading misinformation. But his tone, structured, analytical, at times dismissive, continued to generate unease. "We believe Madeleine is still alive," he said, but the phrase didn't carry emotional weight. It sounded like a press release. Supporters argued that Gerry was doing what any rational person would do, protecting his family, staying focused, not allowing emotion to derail the search. But critics believed something deeper was at play. They pointed to inconsistencies, the lack of visible grief, the precise but detached phrasing, even his body language, hands clasped, chin down, shoulders squared, became a subject of forensic-level scrutiny. What made the situation more volatile was Gerry's decision to remain in the public eye. He wasn't passive. He pursued interviews, responded to allegations, even engaged legal teams to counter specific narratives. That assertiveness, commendable in many contexts, was read differently here. To skeptics, it felt like image management. To supporters, it was desperation in action. The contradictions never resolved. Gerry McCann was both the father searching for his daughter and the man carefully orchestrating the search's public face. Every sentence he spoke was examined. Every silence, questioned. And while no concrete evidence ever emerged to tie him to wrongdoing, his demeanor, delivery, and discipline became part of the investigation in the eyes of the public. 3 months after his daughter vanished, Gerry McCann appeared on the Spanish talk show La Noria, alongside his wife Kate. The intention was clear: keep Madeleine's image in the public consciousness and revive momentum in Southern Europe. But what unfolded on that stage was not a message of hope. It became one of Gerry's most scrutinized media moments. The studio was hot. Tension hung in the air, thickened by translation delays and legal constraints. The host, Jordi Gonzalez, began gently. He asked about public support, their family, the campaign. Gerry responded with practiced composure, offering calm, measured answers. But that calm would not last long. Then came the pivot. Gonzalez referenced reports of blood traces found in apartment 5A and noted that Gerry had been the last family member to see Madeleine alive. The shift in Gerry's posture was immediate. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped his knees. "All these questions are about the investigation," he snapped. "And we can't comment." Seconds later, he stood up, pulled off his microphone, and walked off the set. For over a minute, cameras remained on the empty seat next to Kate, who sat frozen. The room shifted from broadcast to spectacle. Gerry did eventually return. He apologized, sat back down, and forced a tight smile. A spokesperson later attributed the outburst to heat and exhaustion, citing the stifling studio conditions. But the damage was done. The incident was instantly picked up by Spanish and British media. It was clipped, subtitled, and circulated online. Viewers noted not only the walkout, but the way Gerry delivered his apology, with a rehearsed calm that felt more like damage control than remorse. The explanation, "We can't comment," was legally sound, given Portuguese restrictions. But it didn't feel sufficient. For many viewers, the moment marked a shift. Until then, Gerry had largely maintained an image of stoic control. This was different. It was sharp, reactive, and emotional, but not in a way that elicited sympathy. He didn't break down crying. He didn't plead for understanding. He left. Comment threads exploded. "Why walk out if you have nothing to hide?" some asked. Others observed that most grieving parents would jump at any chance to keep public attention alive, especially in a country still receptive to their story. Why retreat? Even the body language told a story. Gerry had previously faced journalists without faltering. But here, a single reference to forensic evidence, specifically blood traces, triggered something different. He didn't rebut the claim. He didn't redirect the conversation. He left. In the true crime world, silence, or refusal, is rarely neutral. It gets interpreted, and in this case, the public didn't need proof. They only needed a moment. Lenoria gave them one. Some defended Gerry, noting that legal boundaries can be suffocating. Portuguese law prohibited suspects from discussing active investigations. Others pointed out the emotional toll of repeating traumatic details in front of foreign audiences. But the skepticism stuck. To this day, the Lenoria interview remains a pivotal media moment in the McCann timeline. Not for what was said, but for how it ended. It didn't collapse the narrative, but it cracked the surface. Gerry, the composed architect of the public campaign, had shown a fissure. And in a case driven by perception as much as proof, that crack became impossible to ignore. In January 2008, at the height of suspicion surrounding them, Gerry and Kate McCann gave an exclusive interview to Vanity Fair. At the time, they remained official suspects, arguidos, under Portuguese law, though they strongly denied any involvement in their daughter's disappearance. For Gerry, this interview wasn't just a chance to respond. It was an opportunity to reframe the entire narrative. "I made a decision that we had to promote Madeleine to keep her in the public eye," Gerry said early in the piece. To many, the sentence sounded strategic, almost corporate. Critics noted that his choice of the word promote, rather than search, find, or fight for, reflected a shift from grief to branding. The focus was no longer on Madeleine, but on controlling the optics around her. He also made a sweeping denial of their legal status. "No one has ever regarded us as suspects." The statement was direct, but not accurate. By that point, both Gerry and Kate had been publicly named arguidos by Portuguese police. His phrasing appeared to hinge on a technicality. Perhaps he meant the UK authorities hadn't seen them as suspects. But for an audience reading the interview, the claim seemed misleading. When the conversation turned to the investigation itself, Gerry grew visibly sharper. He criticized Portuguese investigators for their lack of transparency and professionalism. Referencing a quote from former CEOP head Jim Gamble, "We were treated like a colonial force." The implication was clear. Gerry believed British efforts had been stonewalled by a defensive foreign system, one eager to shift blame rather than find truth. But it wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. His tone throughout the interview was confident, composed, occasionally defiant. He didn't stumble. He didn't hesitate. His answers were clean, polished, and direct. His physical demeanor, straight-backed, assertive, projected control. In contrast, Kate sat quieter, softer. Once again, the visual dynamic raised questions. Who was leading this story? When asked about the now infamous forensic reports, specifically the cadaver dog alerts and partial DNA samples found in the family's rental car. Gerry dismissed the findings outright. He called the accusations ludicrous and emphasized the implausibility of hiding a body during the brief windows between dinner checks. "It doesn't make sense," he said. But some readers noted the shift in his delivery here. His sentences became shorter, his tone more clipped, not emotional, but edged. To supporters, this was strength, a man staying focused under unimaginable pressure. But to skeptics, the polish felt rehearsed, the messaging too smooth. One reader comment circulating after the article summarized it succinctly. "It reads like a media strategy, not a father's cry." Indeed, the interview felt curated. Madeleine's name was mentioned less than expected. Phrases like "the situation" and "this case" replaced personal references. The language felt detached, deliberate. The Vanity Fair piece cemented a paradox. Gerry McCann as both the grieving father and the crisis manager. He was pleading for public support, while controlling the frame of that plea. The result was a portrait that invited scrutiny, not closure. 1 year after Madeleine McCann disappeared, Gerry McCann stepped once again into the public spotlight, not with grief, but with a plan. The May Day for Madeleine campaign, launched in May 2008, marked a shift in tone. Gone was the emotional urgency of the early days. In its place, a structured, strategic media push aimed at gathering information directly from the public. In an interview with The Telegraph, Gerry urged readers to bypass traditional authorities and contact the family's private investigators instead. "If you've given information to the police, Crime Stoppers, or Portuguese police, send it to us as well," he said. On the surface, it sounded like a desperate plea from a father refusing to give up. But for others, the phrasing carried a more troubling implication, that Gerry no longer trusted official investigations and wanted to redirect control into his own hands. The campaign was carefully packaged: posters, a website, a new hotline. It was polished, clear, and unmistakably professional. It also sparked discomfort among investigators. Why sidestep law enforcement? Why urge the public to duplicate tips rather than rely on official channels? Gerry argued that leads might have been lost in bureaucratic dead ends. "There's been so much noise," he said, "that people can't distinguish the real message." He was trying to cut through the chaos. But critics saw a different tactic: information management. Gerry continued to emphasize hope. "There's no evidence Madeleine has been seriously harmed," he said, referencing U.S. statistics suggesting that many abducted children survive. It was a calculated reassurance, not only to the public, but perhaps to himself. Yet again, the wording caught attention. He didn't say, "We believe Madeleine is alive." He said, "There's no evidence she's been seriously harmed." The phrasing, though factual, felt cautious, carefully measured, as if written for clarity over emotion. Observers noted how Gerry's language consistently leaned into control. His gestures during the interview were open, hands spread, eye contact steady. He was no longer the defensive figure from earlier confrontations. He was, once again, the campaign lead. But even in that openness, something rang scripted. The phrase, "refocus attention," appeared multiple times in statements, echoing his earlier Vanity Fair phrasing from January. This wasn't just a man searching. It was a man managing narrative fatigue. The emphasis on private investigators was one of the most contested points in the interview. To supporters, it was a practical response to stalled police efforts. The Portuguese investigation had lost momentum. Leads had dried up. If the police weren't pursuing the case aggressively, who else would? But to skeptics, the decision raised red flags. Why avoid collaboration with official investigators? Why push for independent control? Some speculated it was a tactic to screen and filter information. By channeling tips through a privately controlled network, the McCanns could choose what reached authorities and what didn't. There was no evidence to support this idea, but in the vacuum of resolution, speculation thrived. Still, Gerry insisted the campaign wasn't about defiance. It was about action. Whatever people think of the situation, Madeleine is a completely innocent child, and we need to find her if everyone pulls together. The line struck an emotional chord. For a moment, Gerry's tone softened. But then, as quickly as it emerged, it returned to form. He thanked the media, reiterated timelines, and urged vigilance. The May Day for Madeleine campaign was effective in reigniting global attention. But it also cemented Gerry McCann's role as more than a grieving father. He was now a strategist, a spokesman and, some argued, a gatekeeper. In a case defined as much by narrative as evidence, the decision to reroute public trust away from police and into the hands of a controlled investigation added yet another layer to the mystery. Was it desperation? Or something more calculated? 10 years after Madeleine McCann vanished, Gerry McCann sat down with the BBC for a commemorative interview. The setting was quiet, reflective. There was no campaign banner, no media blitz, just a man attempting to describe the emotional weight of a missing child after a full decade of uncertainty. There's an ongoing, constant pain from Madeleine's absence, Gerry said, his voice lower than in past appearances. He described living with a new normal, raising the twins, Sean and Amelie, in the long shadow of their sister's disappearance. For a brief moment, the polished public figure seemed to give way to something more raw. Still, the message was consistent. They had not given up. "We still believe there's a chance Madeleine is alive," he stated, his tone deliberate, his gaze unwavering. The line was intended to offer hope. Yet for some viewers, it triggered discomfort. Across social media, reactions were mixed. Many expressed sympathy, noting Gerry's restraint and endurance. But others circled back to old concerns. Specifically, the inconsistencies in the McCann's early statements. Why had Gerry changed his account of which door he entered through on the night Madeleine disappeared? Why had the timeline shifted slightly between interviews? Even after 10 years, these questions hadn't faded. If anything, the passage of time had sharpened them. And for critics, Gerry's composure, his calm, unwavering tone, once again raised doubts. Was it the strength of a father enduring the unthinkable? Or the precision of someone with something to protect? Observers noted that Gerry avoided any mention of specific events from that night. No details, no acknowledgement of the controversial evidence introduced in 2007. The narrative remained high-level, emotionally potent, but factually veiling. In true crime storytelling, anniversaries often reopen wounds and invite re-examination. This interview did both. It reignited public empathy, but also reactivated suspicion. A decade later, Gerry McCann was still searching. But so were millions of viewers, still searching for answers in his words, his tone, and the spaces in between. More than a decade after his daughter vanished, Gerry McCann returned to public radio. This time not to campaign, but to reflect. His appearance on BBC Radio 4's Pearl, Two Fathers, Two Daughters was deeply personal, deliberately stripped of strategy, inspired by a medieval poem about a father mourning the loss of his daughter. The interview promised a glimpse into Gerry's inner life. And it delivered. At least on the surface. I saw this as an opportunity to talk about the special bond between a father and daughter, Gerry explained, thinking it might help other men in similar situations. His voice, usually controlled and deliberate in past interviews, trembled at moments. He admitted, "There are times I've felt abandoned by God." It was, by all accounts, the most vulnerable he had ever sounded in public. The shift was striking. For years, Gerry had maintained a polished exterior, structured statements, strategic messaging, and a near-total focus on facts. Here, for the first time, he acknowledged spiritual struggle, doubt, fatigue. "I am absolutely resolved to carry on looking for Madeleine," he added, and yet the tone was no longer one of PR discipline. It was confessional. Listeners praised the honesty. On social media, many described the segment as heartbreaking, calling Gerry's words a long, overdue glimpse of genuine emotion. It felt human, undeniably so. But not everyone was convinced. In online forums and comment sections, skepticism returned. Some noted that Gerry's sudden shift, from carefully managed spokesperson to vulnerable father, felt rehearsed. "He's had years to perfect how to sound authentic." One user wrote, Others pointed out that this moment of emotional openness came at a time when public attention had significantly faded. Was the interview a reflection of real spiritual turmoil, or a recalibrated PR effort? Critics referenced earlier interviews where Gerry had shown remarkable restraint, even detachment, under pressure. His calculated responses in 2007 and 2008, his media walkout in Spain, his denial of Argudo status. These moments didn't align with the broken father presented on radio. To some, it was emotional timing, not emotional truth. Still, no one could claim with certainty what was real and what was performed. And in the absence of closure, every word from Gerry, whether whispered or shouted, remains suspect to interpretation. His appearance on Pearl didn't resolve the case, but it reminded the world of its emotional gravity and reignited the question, how much of Gerry McCann do we really know? In July 2024, Gerry McCann reemerged in the public eye, not to discuss new evidence or make an emotional plea, but to confront the media itself. In Tabloids on Trial, a televised documentary aired by ITV, Gerry appeared alongside Kate to examine how sensationalist coverage had shaped, and, in his words, distorted, the search for their daughter. His tone was firm, restrained, but laced with long suppressed resentment. The press intrusion added to our pain, he said, spreading false narratives that hurt our search for Madeleine. The line was not shouted. It was delivered with surgical precision, each word measured for effect. Gerry pointed specifically to outlets like The Sun and News of the World, which had published speculative stories, leaked investigation details, and even suggested parental guilt. It was a violation of our privacy, he said, and we fought for justice. He referenced a 2023 settlement with News Group, newspapers over illegal information gathering, a rare legal victory, but one that came years too late to undo the reputational damage. For some viewers, the documentary offered long, overdue vindication. It painted Gerry and Kate as secondary victims, targets of a relentless tabloid machine that fed off ambiguity and grief. On social media, many praised Gerry for his composure and clarity. Finally, someone's holding the media accountable. One comment read, but the support wasn't universal. Skeptics saw something else in Gerry's appearance. They noted how the documentary allowed him to recenter public attention, not on the investigation, but on his image. He's been accused for years of managing the narrative. One user posted, now he's reframing himself as the victim of that narrative. The criticism wasn't entirely unfounded. While the documentary addressed media ethics, it skirted around long, standing questions about the McCanns' early behavior, contradictions in testimony, and the ongoing mystery of Madeleine's whereabouts. Gerry's declaration, "We've never stopped looking for Madeleine," was moving, but also familiar. It echoed statements made in 2008, 2011, 2017, and beyond. The repetition began to feel less like conviction and more like choreography. Still, few could deny that the media had played a volatile role in the case. If Gerry's goal was to expose the damage wrought by reckless reporting, Tabloids on Trial made that case effectively. But in the world of true crime, where doubt clings to every frame and quote, even an attack on the press becomes subject to interpretation. Was it accountability, or a deflection? Through a series of interviews, we see a Gerry McCann with many layers, sometimes tense, sometimes defensive, and often suspicious. But is this really a reflection of a cover-up, or just the image of a father struggling in pain and helplessness? In the sequel, we will see Gerry not as a potential suspect, but as a human being, with his fears, hopes, and the silent battle to keep his daughter for 18 years. So, which door did Gerry use to enter the family's holiday apartment on the night of Madeleine's disappearance? On May 4, 2007, just one day after the event, Gerry told Portuguese police that he had entered apartment 5A through the front door using a key. However, 6 days later, on May 10, he revised his statement. This time, he said he had used the back patio door, which had been left unlocked and could only be opened from the inside. To some, this discrepancy may have seemed trivial, a detail easily confused in a state of distress. But for others, including members of the PJ and an increasingly skeptical online public, it became a potential red flag. By 2024, social media accounts such as McCann Case Tweet had reignited debate over this inconsistency, labeling it as a sign of potential deception. The reasoning was simple. If Gerry had nothing to hide, why would he change such a critical piece of his testimony? Although there was no physical evidence linking him to any wrongdoing. The shift in narrative became part of a broader pattern that fueled suspicion. Detractors pointed to this change as the first in a series of questionable statements made by Gerry throughout the investigation. The pressure escalated in September 2007 when Portuguese police formally designated both Gerry and Kate McCann as arguidos, or official suspects. This development came after forensic teams, including British specialists, examined the McCanns' rental car and apartment. Police claimed to have discovered traces of Madeleine's DNA in two key locations. In the trunk of the rental car the couple had hired 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance, and behind the sofa in apartment 5A. The implication was chilling, that Madeleine had died in the apartment, and her body had somehow been transported later. Gerry vehemently rejected these claims. He challenged the integrity of the forensic process, arguing that the collection methods were flawed and that contamination was likely. The samples, according to independent analysts later consulted by the McCanns, were considered partial and inconclusive. Still, the press seized on the idea of corpse DNA in the car, igniting a media frenzy that painted Gerry and Kate in an ominous light. In a 2008 interview, Gerry addressed the allegations directly, calling them ludicrous. His response was measured but firm. How could we have hidden a body, then moved it weeks later in a car we didn't even rent at the time? This rhetorical question became a central defense for Gerry, highlighting the implausibility of executing such an elaborate cover. Up in the brief, closely, watch time window available to them. He also pointed out that if such a drastic action had taken place, it would have required a level of precision and deceit beyond the capacity of any normal grieving parent under public and legal scrutiny. Another controversial element was the use of specially trained cadaver dogs during the investigation. According to police reports, the dogs alerted to the scent of blood and human decomposition in two specific locations, behind the sofa in the McCann's apartment and in their rental car. For the PJ, this seemed to bolster their theory that Madeleine had died in the apartment and that her body had been moved. Once again, Gerry pushed back. He questioned the scientific reliability of using cadaver dogs as definitive evidence. He noted that no corroborating physical samples, such as verified DNA or blood analysis, had confirmed what the dogs allegedly detected. Moreover, he highlighted the possibility of cross-contamination. Given the frantic search activity inside the apartment and the use of various personnel and equipment, the environment was far from sterile, making it impossible to rule out secondary transfer of odors or biological material. Without definitive lab-based evidence, Gerry argued, the dog's reactions should be treated as speculative rather than conclusive. Across these controversies, Gerry McCann maintained a steady, if somewhat guarded, public presence. His critics viewed his calm demeanor as emotionally detached, possibly evasive. Supporters, however, saw a man grappling with extraordinary grief and suspicion, choosing rationality over spectacle. Rather than lashing out or dramatically defending himself, Gerry stuck to facts, raised questions about procedural integrity, and remained focused on what he saw as the essential mission: finding his daughter. Even as doubts lingered in public discourse, none of the forensic or behavioral suspicions ever resulted in charges. The inconsistencies in Gerry's statements, the disputed DNA results, and the cadaver dog alerts all shared one critical flaw. None of them were legally or scientifically conclusive. Yet in the court of public opinion, they cast a long shadow. To this day, Gerry McCann's credibility continues to be debated. But amid the swirling speculation, what stands out is his choice to confront pressure with control, to meet accusation with logic, and to keep Madeleine's memory alive. Even as many turned their focus to him, Whether as a strategic move or a reflection of personal discipline, his response to the avalanche of suspicion has remained largely consistent: deny wrongdoing, question the evidence, and never stop searching. Throughout the intense public scrutiny that followed the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, Gerry McCann maintained a strikingly composed exterior. He was not a man given to public displays of anguish. No weeping into cameras, no explosive outbursts, no theatrical declarations of innocence. Instead, he presented himself with quiet restraint, furrowed brows, measured words, and a voice that was steady, if at times subdued. This demeanor became a defining feature of his media presence and sparked conflicting interpretations. To some, his restraint felt cold, even suspicious. To others, it was a necessary armor, a father's disciplined effort to remain functional in the face of chaos. His emotional reserve was occasionally punctured in rare moments of vulnerability. In a 2018 interview on BBC Radio 4's Pearl, Two Fathers, Two Daughters, Gerry admitted, "There are times I've felt abandoned by God." It was a quiet confession that revealed the spiritual and emotional toll the ordeal had taken. Yet even in expressing this grief, he chose words carefully, never letting pain devolve into outrage, never accusing, never pleading. It was a form of control that, over time, became a media strategy as much as a psychological necessity. While many public figures in similar circumstances might have lashed out at their critics, Gerry McCann took a different path. He avoided direct confrontations with conspiracy theorists or online accusers. He rarely engaged with hostile media. His responses, when offered, were often neutral or lightly critical, never inflammatory. Instead of using his platform to fight back against rumor and speculation, Gerry focused his communication on one unwavering message: we just want to find our daughter. This restraint, this choice to speak less, to accuse no one, was not a sign of evasion, as some critics claimed. Rather, it was a calculated form of damage control. Gerry seemed to understand that in a media landscape, increasingly driven by sensation and binary judgments, his best defense was not counterattack, but silence. The less he said about the allegations, the less fuel he gave to those looking to paint him as manipulative or guilty. His silence was not weakness. It was discipline. But Gerry McCann's resistance was never purely emotional. While his composure served as a shield, his public arguments were grounded in rationality. He did not dismiss his critics by appealing to emotion. Instead, he confronted speculation with logic. For instance, when confronted with the idea that he or Kate might have harmed Madeleine, Gerry responded not with outrage, but with reason. If they had done something to their daughter, how could they have hidden her body so effectively in the few minutes available between the routine checks? And how could they have transported it days later in a rental car, under the full glare of police and press attention? These scenarios, he argued, simply did not make sense. His tone in interviews was often calm, but the subtext carried something deeper, a quiet resilience. Gerry spoke not just as a father in mourning, but as someone carrying the additional burden of being misunderstood, misrepresented, and mistrusted. He endured, as he once described it, a different kind of grief, the grief of being seen not only as a victim, but as a suspect. Many of those who once prayed for Madeleine began, over time, to doubt her father. Yet Gerry never lashed out. He did not collapse beneath the weight of public judgment. He chose instead to walk a lonelier path, quiet, deliberate, and focused. That focus never wavered. Despite the endless rumors, legal hurdles, and emotional trauma, Gerry McCann remained steadfast in his mission. His words, repeated in multiple interviews over the years, became a kind of mantra. "We've never stopped looking for Madeleine. And we won't rest until we have answers." These were not slogans for public relations. They were reminders, to himself, to his family, and to the world, that amid the noise and doubt, there was still a child missing. That was all that truly mattered. Gerry's media appearances grew fewer over time, but when he did speak, his message remained consistent. He avoided addressing specific allegations, choosing instead to redirect the conversation toward hope and perseverance. He did not use press conferences to attack investigators or critics. He did not respond to every article or online theory. Instead, he maintained what some described as a selective public presence, stepping forward only to renew the search for Madeleine or to mark significant anniversaries. His communication was careful, precise, and always centered on his daughter. In the end, Gerry McCann's public image was shaped not just by what he said, but by what he chose not to say. He refused to let grief consume him in public. He refused to let suspicion define him. And he refused to allow the media, or anyone else, to shift the focus away from the essential fact that a child had vanished and had yet to be found. In a world addicted to outrage and quick judgment, Gerry's quiet resistance stands out. He didn't try to win public opinion. He didn't demand sympathy. He simply kept going, facing down suspicion with reason, meeting cruelty with silence, and holding on to hope in a world that gave him every reason to let it go. In the wake of unimaginable loss, some people collapse, others retreat, but a rare few rise and fight with relentless resolve. Just 12 days after the disappearance of his daughter Madeleine on May 3, 2007, Gerry McCann and his wife Kate made a decision that would define the next 2 decades of their lives. On May 15, 2007, they officially launched Madeleine's fund, leaving no stone unturned Leltied, a name that itself was a mission statement, a refusal to yield to uncertainty, a vow to exhaust every possible lead, resource, and idea in the search for their daughter. The urgency of the fund's creation spoke volumes. Rather than waiting for governments or police agencies to act, the McCanns moved swiftly to build an infrastructure of hope and persistence. At a time when public support was still high, and the media was fixated on their story, the fund became a vehicle not only for financial resources, but also for strategy. Its purpose was clear: to sustain and support all efforts, legal, investigative, and media-related, aimed at finding Madeleine and securing justice for her disappearance. Gerry's role in the fund was neither ceremonial nor symbolic. He and Kate jointly oversaw the fund's operations and closely managed the use of donations. They were careful to ensure transparency and accountability, knowing full well that scrutiny would follow every financial decision. The money that flowed into the fund came from diverse sources: public donations from concerned citizens worldwide, legal settlements from libel cases against tabloid newspapers, and later, revenue generated from a deeply personal book authored by Kate. That book, Madeleine, was published on May 12, 2011, Madeleine's 8th birthday. Though Kate was the sole author, Gerry played a vital supporting role in its promotion and purpose. The book was not a memoir in the traditional sense. It was a deeply emotional, painfully honest chronicle of what life had become since their daughter vanished. But it was also a financial lifeline. All proceeds were channeled back into the fund, ensuring that the search for Madeleine would continue, even when official resources waned. The book helped recenter global attention on the case and provided another avenue through which the public could engage meaningfully with their mission. Beyond fundraising, Gerry took on the role of communicator in chief. He understood that public interest was not guaranteed, that the world moved on, that headlines faded. So he made sure that Madeleine's name remained in the conversation. Over the years, he appeared in key media interviews, each time reinforcing the singular objective to bring Madeleine home. In a 2008 interview with Vanity Fair, Gerry emphasized the importance of keeping Madeleine visible in the public eye. In BBC appearances in both 2010 and 2017, he reflected on the pain of enduring without answers, but insisted that the search was far from over. And in 2024, in ITV's Tabloids on Trial, he shifted focus toward the damage wrought by sensationalist media, while reiterating his commitment to the mission. His words, repeated often, became rallying cries: "We've never stopped looking for Madeleine. She is still missed, still loved. Why remain committed to turning over every stone?" But Gerry's leadership extended beyond the public stage. Internally, the Find Madeleine Fund evolved into something larger than just a family's campaign. It became a symbol of hope for other families enduring similar heartbreak. Over time, the fund became a touchpoint for others with missing children, offering both emotional support and practical advice. The McCann's experiences, what they learned, who they trusted, how they built their strategy, were shared with others in need, creating an informal network of resilience and advocacy. In this way, the fund transcended its original purpose. It was no longer only about Madeleine. It became a platform for broader awareness about missing children, and it began influencing conversations about investigative protocols, media ethics, and parental rights. Gerry and Kate's journey prompted debates in Parliament, reform in police coordination, and introspection within the British media industry. Through their endurance, they forced institutions to ask harder questions about how such cases are handled and how families are treated in the aftermath. By the 2020s, with official investigations stalled and public attention fragmented, many might have chosen to retreat. But not Gerry. Though his media appearances became less frequent, his resolve never wavered. Instead of speaking through television studios, he and Kate pivoted toward digital platforms, primarily through the Find Madeleine website. These updates became more than status reports, they were statements of spiritual endurance. In 2024, a post signed by both parents read, "Madeleine is still missing, still very much missed. The police investigation continues, and we await a breakthrough." And in 2025, amid renewed searches near Atalaya, close to where suspect Christian Bruckner once lived, Gerry declined all media interviews. Instead, the fund issued a brief but powerful statement: "We remain committed to turning over every stone." His voice was still present, even in silence. His focus had not shifted. What stands out in Gerry's approach is his emotional economy. He never resorted to grand gestures or emotional appeals. He did not weaponize grief or beg for sympathy. He acted, consistently, with intention and restraint. Every interview, every press release, every strategic decision was aligned with a singular belief that his daughter could still be found. And even if she wasn't, the effort must continue. Because that effort had become its own form of justice. He weathered 2 decades of speculation, judgment, and suspicion. He was dissected in the media, debated online, and misunderstood by many. But he did not collapse. He did not become combative. He remained composed, focused, and present. Where others might have let bitterness take root, Gerry chose to transform pain into purpose. Today, the Find Madeleine Fund stands as one of the most enduring civilian-led search efforts in modern history. It has outlasted police task forces, outpaced news cycles, and survived in a world that is often quick to forget. That is due, in no small part, to Gerry McCann. His quiet, methodical leadership, his refusal to let go, to give up, or to disappear, has become the heartbeat of a campaign that was once born out of fear, but now moves forward on hope. Whether Madeleine will ever be found remains unknown. But one thing is certain: Gerry McCann has ensured that she will never be erased. He has built not just a search effort, but a legacy of commitment that speaks to any parent who has ever lost a child. The fund may have started as a tool of survival, a way to regain control in a situation of chaos. But today, it is something more. It is a monument to the unbreakable bond between father and daughter, and to the belief that even in darkness, love can persist, organize, and act. In the words Gerry never tires of repeating, "We've never stopped looking for Madeleine." And in every action he takes, that promise endures. By the start of the 2020s, 13 years had passed since Madeleine McCann vanished from apartment 5A in Praia da Luz. The world had changed, so had the investigation. In June 2020, German authorities named a new suspect, Christian Bruckner, a convicted sex offender and repeat criminal who had lived intermittently in southern Portugal around the time of Madeleine's disappearance. For many, this marked the most significant shift in the case in over a decade. For Gerry and Kate McCann, it brought a mixture of guarded hope and familiar restraint. They did not rush to make headlines or offer dramatic statements. Instead, they chose a tone of dignified persistence. "We will never give up hope of finding Madeleine alive," they wrote in a rare joint statement. "But whatever the outcome, "We need to know the truth." It was a sentiment that encapsulated their journey, a balance of relentless optimism tempered by hard-earned realism. Years later, in June 2025, that hope was quietly tested again. Acting on long-standing suspicions and new logistical analysis, German and Portuguese police launched a renewed search effort in Atalaya, a remote area just 1.6 kilometers from the Ocean Club resort. The operation took place over 3 days, from June 3 to 5, and involved ground, penetrating radar, forensic teams, and trained dogs. The site held particular relevance. It was once frequented by Bruckner, and rumors had long suggested he may have used the terrain to hide evidence. The search yielded several items: 2 firearms, clothing, and animal bones. Among the weapons recovered was a 6.35mm handgun, which was immediately sent to Lisbon for forensic testing. Yet by the end of the week, headlines had already begun to fade. According to Correio de Manhai, early assessments suggested the firearm was not linked to the McCann case. The other findings, disturbing but inconclusive, only added to the long list of fragments in a puzzle that still lacked a center. Notably, Gerry did not appear publicly during the operation. In earlier years, he might have attended a press briefing or issued a direct appeal. But in 2025, his presence was quieter, more symbolic than vocal. It was the Find Madeleine Fund that spoke on his behalf, reiterating a phrase now deeply associated with the McCann's legacy: "We remain committed to turning over every stone." Behind the scenes, Gerry McCann's life had changed in rhythm, though not in essence. He remained a cardiology consultant in Leicester, a role he had held since before Madeleine's disappearance. He lived in Rothley with Kate and their teenage twins, Sean and Amalie, who had grown up in the shadow of a sister they could barely remember, but had never forgotten. Gerry rarely granted interviews anymore. His media presence had narrowed to annual statements, carefully worded messages that appeared on the Find Madeleine website around the anniversary of her disappearance or her birthday. In May 2024, on what would have been Madeleine's 21st birthday, Gerry and Kate wrote, "Whether Madeleine is near or far, she is with us every day." It was not an appeal for attention, nor a plea for sympathy. It was simply a father and mother affirming that, in their hearts, their daughter was still very much alive. By this stage, Gerry no longer held on to miracles. His was not a desperate faith, but a deeply rooted conviction. He did not fantasize about dramatic rescues or televised revelations. But neither did he accept the alternative, that Madeleine was gone. He existed in a state that few could bear living with uncertainty, year after year, without surrendering to despair. In interviews from earlier years, he had described this tension: the need to keep hope alive, while also continuing with life. That meant raising his children, honoring his responsibilities at work, and, most crucially, protecting the memory of Madeleine. For Gerry, that memory was not a photo on the mantelpiece or a moment trapped in time. It was a living, breathing presence in the choices he made every day. The Find Madeleine Fund continued to operate quietly but steadily. Its digital presence remained active, and its mission had evolved from a single search to a broader message of advocacy and remembrance. Every May 3rd and every May 12th, the McCanns released new messages. In 2024, they reaffirmed their mission: "We are still determined to leave no stone unturned." Though media attention had waned, the McCanns had become their own messengers. The fund became not only their voice, but their shield, a way to speak on their terms, when they chose to, and only in service of the goal that still defined their lives. What emerged during this final phase of the search was a transformed image of Gerry McCann. He was no longer a regular fixture in the news cycle. The public had long stopped dissecting his body language or analyzing his tone. The fervor of accusation had faded, and in its place remained something quieter but more powerful: a man who had never stopped searching. He had, in a way, become a symbol, not just of parental love, but of persistence in the face of a world that often demands closure before it's ready. Gerry was not chasing headlines. He was tending to something more sacred: the dignity of the unanswered. In a culture where grief often demands spectacle, and where narratives must be fast and decisive, Gerry McCann chose something different. His actions, measured, consistent, unsensational, reflected a refusal to let time dictate truth. In doing so, he reminded the world that love does not obey the news cycle, and that hope, even unfulfilled, can be honorable. To some, Gerry McCann's quiet perseverance might seem like resignation. But to those who have followed the case closely, it is the truest form of strength. He has weathered suspicion, slander, and exhaustion, and still, with little fanfare, he moves forward. Father, doctor, protector of a legacy not yet complete. Whether Madeleine McCann is ever found remains unknown. But in Gerry's silence, in his annual statements, in the simple phrase etched into every press release, we remain committed to turning over every stone. The world finds a different kind of closure. Not the resolution of fact, but the endurance of love. For nearly 2 decades, Gerry McCann has walked a road few would choose, and even fewer could endure. His name, once unknown beyond a small circle of colleagues and friends in Leicester, became global overnight, not for achievement, but for heartbreak. He was not a politician, a celebrity, or a criminal. He was a father, and that simple identity, once private and sacred, became exposed to the glare of cameras, headlines, courtrooms, conspiracy threads, and a world eager to assign blame. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann in May 2007 tore a hole in the life of a family and in the fabric of public trust. It sparked international investigations, divided public opinion, and triggered a tidal wave of media coverage that rarely relented. And at the center of it all stood Gerry, scrutinized, questioned, doubted, and, at times, vilified. Yet somehow, in the wreckage of all that attention, Gerry McCann endured. He was not flawless. He did not pretend to be. He made mistakes, small inconsistencies in statements, moments of emotional detachment that were interpreted by some as guilt, by others as grief restrained. But Gerry never asked the world to see him as a martyr or a victim. He asked only that they help find his daughter. And when that help became judgment, when sympathy curdled into suspicion, he did not retreat. He adapted. In the early days, Gerry stood in front of flashing bulbs and rolling cameras, asking for the public's help, for information, for awareness. As the years passed, his voice grew quieter, but no less determined. He stopped responding to every rumor, every insult, every false theory. Instead, he channeled his energy into what he could control, building and maintaining the Find Madeleine campaign, supporting his wife and children, and continuing his work as a cardiologist. A quiet life behind closed doors, marked by purpose, not performance. The narrative surrounding Gerry McCann was shaped not just by what he did, but by what others chose to see. Some viewed his composure as coldness, his restraint as avoidance. They questioned his every word, dissected his body language, speculated endlessly. But over time, even the loudest voices grew quieter, and what remained was not scandal, but persistence. That, in many ways, is Gerry's legacy. Not a man of charisma or drama, but a man who refused to disappear when it would have been easiest. He continued to write, to update the public, to work with investigators, and to live. And through it all, he held on to the simplest, yet most powerful force of love for his daughter. There is a particular kind of strength that comes from refusing to let grief define you. Gerry McCann never staged a grand campaign to prove his innocence. He didn't demand the world exonerate him. He simply continued, day after day, year after year, doing what many would find impossible, hoping without answers. In doing so, he transcended the role of suspect or spokesperson. He became, quietly and stubbornly, a symbol of a father's devotion in the face of endless uncertainty. In a media culture addicted to spectacle and immediate resolution, Gerry's story is a jarring contradiction. There is no closure, no neatly packaged ending, no cathartic confession or final verdict. There is only the long, quiet ache of not knowing. And it is within that ache that Gerry has lived, not as a man broken by tragedy, but as a father transformed by it. When he says, "We've never stopped looking for Madeleine," it is not a slogan. It is a truth. Not a hopeful sentiment uttered once a year, but a commitment that stretches across continents, calendar pages, and the very limits of emotional endurance. Through legal battles, false accusations, public humiliation, and exhausting disappointment, that promise has never changed. Today, Gerry McCann is no longer a regular figure on news broadcasts. He does not attend press conferences or courtrooms. He does not chase media cycles. But in that retreat, he has become something else, a symbol of quiet resilience. A man who, rather than being crushed by the storm, learned to carry it with him. His love for Madeleine is not defined by volume or visibility, but by consistency. It is in the updates posted each May, in the continued work of the Find Madeleine Fund, in the absence of bitterness in his words, in the unwavering presence of a father who, even when the world stopped watching, never stopped searching. That is the legacy of Gerry McCann. Not innocence proven or justice delivered, but love made visible through action. Not the dramatic spectacle of courtroom vindication, but the steady endurance of a man who refused to give up. For those who still look at the McCann case with suspicion, who read too deeply into body language or speculate about every discrepancy, there may never be a satisfying answer. But for those willing to see the quiet humanity beneath the headlines, Gerry McCann stands not as a perfect man, but as a deeply human one, flawed, battered, but unwavering in love. In the end, Gerry is not just a father of a missing child. He is a symbol of what it means to continue loving someone who is no longer present, to resist the world's demand for resolution, and to preserve dignity amid devastation. He is a reminder that in some stories, the power lies not in how they end, but in how long someone is willing to keep going. 18 years after Madeleine's disappearance, Gerry McCann remains a father in the storm, still holding the light, still turning every stone, still whispering hope into the silence. And that, more than any verdict, theory, or news cycle, may be his most profound testimony of all.